Hello, everybody. Welcome to Introduction to Biotechnology. And today we are discussing basic cell structure, cellular design, and organelles. We're also going to be starting out with a little bit of cell theory. I'm going to give you guys a warning. This is going to be a lot of information very quickly. So at any time that you're going through the video and you're watching it, you need to pause. Please pause. Also, there will be notes in Canvas that will have this same information in a written way for those who want to use that. So, with that disclaimer, let's go ahead and get started. So, we're going to start by talking about the power of cells. A cell is a watery body that contains and holds awesome information and powers. Basically, cells are important because they contain DNA, which is the basic information for all living things. Anything that is alive has DNA. So, to make this a little bit more specific, humans have more than 200 types of cells in our bodies. By comparison, a weeping willow tree has about 20. So we've got 10 times the cell differentiation as a weeping willow tree. A blue-green bacteria has one type of cell. We're 200 times more complex and more diversified than a blue-green bacteria. And while we may only have 200 types of cells, our bodies are made of billions and trillions of cells, and each of them are specialized in some way for some purpose. So we're going to take this into cell theory. During the 1830s, as microscopes got improved, scientists were able to better understand the structure and function of cells. And it was at this time cell theory was developed. So cell theory states that all living matter is made up of at least one or more cells, and any cell alive today had its origin in a pre-existing cell. So basically it comes down to this: anything that is alive has cells, and every cell had to come from a pre-existing cell, a cell that was already here. So all living things have cells, and all cells come from a cell before it. Cells create cells. So it's clear that living things are made up of at least one living cell. And because every cell alive today, including your skin cells and your cells in your heart, came from a pre-existing cell, we are truly related to our ancestors and bound to our past through DNA. Now, our DNA changes throughout time a little bit, and it changes throughout generations, but ultimately, our DNA and all living things' DNA is essentially the same. It's just a matter of how that DNA is put and cobbled together to make the new unique you, or the unique fly, or the unique elephant. So, the structure and the scale of molecules in the cell. So, there is a huge amount of organization when it comes to living things. The foundation of all matter, okay? All matter, okay? Plastic, metal, wood. The foundation of all matter is atoms. And because living things are made out of matter, atoms are also the foundation of functioning cells that define all life forms. So atoms bond together in these things called molecules. So molecules look like this. Okay, so at the top you've got the carbon atom, and then water is a molecule. One oxygen atom, two hydrogen atoms combine together to make water, or H2O. Carbon dioxide is one atom of carbon and two oxygen atoms, carbon dioxide. Sulfur dioxide, one atom of sulfur, two oxygen atoms, sulfur dioxide. So molecules basically build into, well, proteins. Simple molecules can link together into long chains inside the cell. And Proteins are the most numerous chain of molecules. So basically, molecules come together and form these living machines called proteins. And proteins are made up of amino acids strung end to end. Those amino acids are those molecules that I'm talking about. And so proteins are the basis for cells. Therefore, they are also created by DNA. And so DNA makes protein through a very sophisticated process that we're going to talk about later. And so it is a never-ending cycle. DNA makes proteins. Proteins are then coded to make the machinery to create DNA. It's very complex. So, in the order of amino acids in these chains is determined by a long molecule called deoxyribonucleic acid. One more time. Deoxyribonucleic acid. So we call deoxyribonucleic acid DNA. And as we've talked about in our terms, DNA is the basic chemical component for all life. Anything that is alive has DNA. So basically, atoms being the smallest unit of matter, the smallest thing in the recognized universe. Yes, there are other things that are smaller, but we're not talking about physics and theoretical physics. We are talking about matter and living things. Atoms are the smallest thing that build matter. So atoms build molecules, molecules build amino acids build proteins, strings of proteins make genes, genes come together to form for chromosomes, and chromosomes are long strands of DNA. And the other thing about this is that the reverse is true. Chromosomes are long strands of DNA. Chromosomes are made of genes. Strings of proteins in the right order are genes. Proteins are built from amino acids and molecules, which are all foundationally built from the matter creator of atoms. So, guys, DNA is the genetic blueprint for all living things, and it is found in the nucleus of the cell. So, like we were talking about with our biotechnology terms, all of these pieces that we've come together have been brought for us to be able to further understand this really complex world of DNA and science. So, inside the cell, there is the nucleus. The nucleus houses the DNA. The DNA can, at certain points, is bundled up into these thread-like structures called chromosomes. And as we kind of unwrap this thread, this long chemical chain, we see the molecules that build the DNA helix, those proteins. So, now, getting back to our look at cells. So, there are some major differences between plant cells and animal cells and bacteria cells, and we're going to talk about those in great detail. But here's just kind of an overview. Plant cells have cell walls as their outermost layer. And plant cells have chloroplasts that contain chlorophyll, and that basically makes plants to be able to make their own food. Animals do not have chloroplast, and they do not have cell walls. And so they also do not have really large vacuoles or storage areas. And so these are the main differences between plant cells and animal cells, and we're going to see this later on. So, going back to a refresher. First, cells are the basic building blocks of life. And understanding the structure of the cell is critical to understanding biotechnology. So, cells are the smallest unit of living things. They grow, they reproduce, they use energy, they respond to their environment. A cell can be an entire organism, or it may be one of billions of cells that make up a living thing. So, Cells are divided and classified in many ways, but one of the main ways that we do that is whether or not there is a nucleus in the cell. So whether or not there's this big ball of DNA or a little string of DNA. So nucleuses are these relatively large structures that we can see under a microscope. It's one of the few organelles that we can see excessively clear when using a microscope. And it's like the brain of the cell. It directs all of the cell's activities. And so when we're getting to cell classification, one of the major ways that we break this down is whether or not a cell has a nucleus or doesn't have a nucleus. So we have prokaryotes, which don't have a nucleus. They have this little string of DNA called a nucleoid. And then we have eukaryotes, which those are plants, animals, fungus. These are all of the living things that are usually a bit more complex in many ways than your prokaryote bacteria and other single-celled organisms. So your typical prokaryote cell looks a bit like this. Instead of the big nucleus ball, it has a nucleoid. It has a DNA strand, and it's a long string of DNA. It also has cytoplasm, which is this liquid that's inside the cell that allows all the stuff inside to kind of float and move around. It's got a cell membrane, and which the cell membrane acts as a gate, letting things in and out of the cell. It has ribosomes, which build proteins, and it has a cell wall, or a capsule, as what it's called with a prokaryotic or bacteria cell, to protect and keep the form and shape of the bacteria or prokaryote. The flagellum is also these hair-like structures that help with the movement of the cell, and there's all types of different types of flagellum that exist, and we're just looking at one example. So our eukaryote cell, as you can see, is very, very complex, and dead in the center, labeled at number 8 and 9, is the nucleus. The nucleus is the center of activity in a eukaryote cell, and I know I have eukaryote spelled incorrectly up at the top. Please bear with me and don't attack me too much. And so now we're getting into what are these main differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and then what do all of these other organelles do in this entire setup. Like, what does this guy do? What's this yellow thing? What's this orange thing? What's this green thing with spots? What's over here? So now let's move forward. Prokaryotes are usually single-celled or one-celled organisms. They don't have a nucleus, and their internal structure is usually much less than in eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotes are also less complex, but they still have many of the same basic internal pieces: ribosomes, cytoplasm, cell membrane. These are all things that prokaryotes and eukaryotes have in common. So then we have prokaryotic structures, or these are the organelles of the prokaryote. So the cytoplasm, the nucleoid, the cell membrane, the cell wall, the ribosomes, the flagellum for movement. And we looked at that and we saw that a little bit earlier, just kind of going over those terms to let them refresh in your mind. So, eukaryotic cells. A eukaryotic cell they're usually made up of more than one cell. And these are organisms that are made up of, or living things that are made up of cells that have a nucleus. And they may have billions of cells like the plant and animal kingdom, or they may be single-celled organisms. But one thing that they do, all eukaryotes have in common, they are always very organized. They have organelles that do specific tasks. So eukaryotic cells take on an infinite number of shapes and purposes. The human body has at least 200 different types of cells. And so all eukaryotes have a number of structures or organelles in common. And so this is a diagram that you're going to see a lot of, and these are what we're going to reference when we are talking about eukaryotic animal and plant cells. Okay, so everything that you see in the picture, on my right is literally the it's literally a diagram of the organelles of a cell. And so we're going to go through what are organelles and what are these pieces called and what do they do. So organelles are smaller parts of a cell that have a specific function, and organelles are required in eukaryotes to carry out proper cell function for the existence of the cell. If the organelles break down, much like when the organs in humans break down, it's got a problem. So the first cell structure, or the first organelle that we're going to talk about, is the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is a kind of thick layer that surrounds the cell, and it acts like a gate. It allows substances in and out of the cell. It helps provide the shape of the cell, and it basically lets in food and waste out. Then we have the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is this watery substance inside the cell that surrounds the cell parts and transports chemicals and nutrients within the cell. Now, it doesn't do that on its own. It just kind of allows for the other organelles and the nutrients and chemicals to be able to move through through itself, through the cytoplasm, to get to the places that it needs to, like to the nucleus, or to the cell membrane, or to the centrioles, or to the ribosomes. Then we've got the nucleus. The nucleus is the largest and most identifiable part of the cell. It contains DNA, which controls the activity of the cell and directs cellular reproduction. It is the brain of the cell. It controls what happens inside the cell. Much of the manipulation in biotechnology is due to us being able to understand and basically take apart and put back together the DNA that is inside of the nucleus. So this is what a nucleus typically looks like. It is labeled number 8, okay, on diagrams. So it's the big blue ball. The gray part at the center is called a nucleolus, and it serves a specific function. It controls the activity of the cell, and back on the nucleus. And it's typically found in the center, and it appears darker than the surrounding material. Now, then we have the ribosome, or as some people pronounce, ribosome. This is attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, and also they kind of float within the cytoplasm, and they often appear as these little spots inside the endoplasmic reticulum. But they kind of look like this, spots, tiny dots inside the cytoplasm and on the ribosome. And what the ribosomes do is they work to produce proteins. They are constantly building proteins to replace proteins that are used or exported from the cell. These are the protein builders of the cell. They keep the cell healthy and alive. The endoplasmic reticulum. So the endoplasmic reticulum carries proteins and other substances through the cytoplasm. There are two main types of endoplasmic reticulums. There's a smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which works as kind of the highway through the cytoplasm, moving food and waste and other stuff through the cytoplasm. Then you have the rough endoplasmic reticulum, is the centerpiece where ribosomes come from. Basically, the rough endoplasmic reticulum takes in those materials and builds ribosomes. So the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is just that, nice and smooth. It doesn't look all messed up. The rough endoplasmic reticulum usually is coated with ribosomes, and basically makes it look like it is an organelle that has a bunch of chunks taken out of it. Then we have the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi bodies, and they are similar to the endoplasmic reticulum, but they look like a thick elastic band that's been folded several times. So this is kind of what the Golgi apparatus looks like. And what it does is it helps transport proteins made by ribosomes out of the cell. The Golgi bodies also make these things called lysosomes, which are the self-destruct buttons in the cell to help maintain balance inside the cell. Lysosomes are these small, round things, and so they help break down and digest molecules for food, but they can also destroy cell organelles and the cell itself if the cell has run its course. So this is what a lysosome looks like, kind of gray. Now, then we have the mitochondria. Mitochondria is the energy factory of the cell, and it's often rod-shaped, and it produces energy for the cellular process. It's the powerhouse of the cell. So it's usually kind of this oval-shaped thing with all of these different kind of crooks and crannies, because what the mitochondria does is it produces energy in the form of a sugar called ATP. And ATP is the food of the cell. So it takes in all these molecules that the cell absorbs to the cell membrane and that are transported by the Golgi apparatus and transformed by the ribosomes, and they are taken in by the mitochondria, broken down, and turned into food for the cell. The mitochondria have their own DNA, and they can replicate themselves if a cell needs more than one mitochondria. Then we have the centrioles. Okay, so the centrioles play a role in cell division. That's the only time that you see the centrioles appear. They are basically guide wires for chromosomes when the cell divides and makes a duplicate of itself. So, we talked about the animal cell, let's talk about the plant cells. So, eukaryotic plant cells have all of the same organelles and structures as the animal cell. The key difference is they have 3 different additional structures, 3 different cells. So first is the cell wall. This is made of cellulose, and the cell walls are only found in plants, bacteria, fungi, and algae, and it provides structure for the organism. It allows substances in and out of the cell, and key here to remember, animal cells do not have cell walls. It's only plants, bacteria, fungi, and algae. Chloroplast. Chloroplast is the other organelle that is only found in plants and some green and blue bacteria. Basically, it's found in plants and some single-celled organisms. It's green and they can contain chlorophyll. Basically, this is important. I forgot to write it down on the PowerPoint slide. Chloroplasts make energy from sunlight. They are important in the playing a role in photosynthesis. Without chloroplast, plants and the organisms that have chloroplasts would not be able to make their own food. They would not be able to survive. Vacuoles. So vacuoles are a large organelle, and it doesn't really have a specific shape, and they are the storage tanks of the cell. So I made them look kind of big, and so that they would be able to hold on to a lot of things. Now, the thing of it is that plant cells and animal cells both have vacuoles, but vacuoles in plant cells are huge and gigantic and crazy big. Inside of animal cells, they're much, much smaller. And so that's just one thing to kind of keep in mind. So now, the last thing that I want to talk to you about is cell movement. So guys, in this, if it works, I don't think it will, No, the macro is broken. What I want you to remember is that these images are not static, okay? These things will move throughout the cell. And so because of that, you need to remember that not everything is always going to be in the exact same place on every cell diagram, because it's never going to be in the exact same place on a cell. So just remember, guys, we are looking at all of this different stuff in regard to cellular design and organelles. And I know this is a lot of information, but I'm sure that you guys can handle it. I also will have copies of the notes for you in Canvas, so you'll be able to look at and compare this information that I presented. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.